Chinese characters of the writing and reading kind. Today we're going to look at these characters and try to clear up some myths, and also we're going to argue which is better, simplified Chinese characters, jiǎntǐzì, or traditional Chinese characters, fántǐzì. They are also sometimes referred to as zheng, like correct, 字体, or correct characters. It can be a complicated, controversial topic, so we should have some fun with this episode, and hopefully it'll also be informative. John, are you ready to do battle?
Bring it on.
The Taiwan History Podcast, Formosa Files, is made possible through the generous sponsorship of the Frank C. Chen Foundation.
Formosa Files.
Chinese characters, that is, the Chinese writing system, is a core element of Chinese culture, obviously. Over 3 millennia old, it was one of the things that bound the various regions and dialects of China together. And for more than 1,000 years, China's imperial examination tested the literacy of would-be bureaucrats. More recently, the Chinese script was a political issue, first with the fall of the Qing dynasty, and then with the People's Republic of China adopting many simplified characters.
By simplified, what is meant is that there are fewer strokes in a character. So just to choose a random thing here. Oh, J.
Okay, good.
J, for example, the second character is something like 13 strokes in traditional, just 3 in simplified, and very ugly.
Okay, again, randomly, Gaosheng, however, is the same in both forms.
Which will make things easier if the PLA...
The People's Liberation Army? Yeah, okay, let's not go there. How's your Chinese reading, John?
Ooh, well, it's better than my writing, I'll put it that way. How's yours?
Similar, but it's kind of like saying that I breathe underwater better than I fly. Neither very well. I recognize or read a whole lot more than I'm able to write, but it doesn't matter anymore with technology, because if you can say them correctly, you can dictate them into your phone, and as long as you recognize which ones are correct, you can write as much Chinese as you can recognize, if you know what I mean.
Interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. Not a tech guy, but yeah, it makes sense. It's an interesting way for those also who are trying to learn English to practice. They can speak English into their phone and see if the phone understands it.
Anyway, we are here today for a grand debate on a very contentious issue that has divided literally 1 billion plus people.
Oh, Eryk, you're trying to bait me with your use of literally. And just putting that aside, you're so prone to exaggeration and hyperbole.
Yeah, I'm American.
But okay, you have a point.
John, we were talking about the debate between simplified and traditional Chinese characters. We thought it would be fun to mirror what we've talked about before. So originally we were going to take a side each and debate, but the more we delved into the subject, the more we realized that we kind of agreed on more than we disagreed on. But, it's more fun to argue.
We both wanted to take the side of traditional characters, so it came down to a game of paper, scissors, and stone, or I believe it's rock, paper, scissors in America, which is simply a translation of the Japanese words for the 3 hand gestures in the game. Yes, we got the game from Japan, but like so many things, it originally came from China.
I've added a gun to the game, and it simplifies things significantly.
Violent American.
Yes. Okay, this is an episode about Chinese, so let's do that. Let's do a 剪刀石头布. Are you ready?
Yes.
剪刀石头布. John, you win. And by the way, bu means cloth, actually, not paper.
Yes, and I think we should back up and start with something fundamental. What are Chinese characters?
Hieroglyphics. It's quite funny to think that pretty much the only language on earth that stuck to the idea of representing sounds and words with pictures is Chinese. Like everyone else, the Koreans, the Vietnamese, they're all like, I think we're going to pick an alphabet.
Yeah, the Chinese characters are like Egyptian hieroglyphics. Well, not really, but I guess compared to other modern scripts, there's a point. But it's something of a myth that Chinese characters are pictographs or ideograms. That is, that they're pictures representing objects and ideas. It's just a minor aspect of Chinese characters. And it's most common with the very basic words. It skews people's understanding.
Yeah, you're right. I have seen so many different interpretations of some. Like this used to be an old man holding a and then somebody else says, actually, that
Yeah.
was a fish with 3 eyes. And yeah. Okay, but Korean is an example of something that looks like some sort of character thing, but it isn't.
They're phonetic characters and designed about 600 years ago by some very clever people and much praised ever since for the logical construction of the script.
Yeah, you can learn to read Korean, I'm told, in a matter of hours. Of course, you wouldn't understand what it means, but each of the symbols is a sound that, you compress into another sound. So it's, I guess, similar to Bopomofo, as I understand it.
Speaking of Bopo Morpho, which is an aid to reading, that's only found in Taiwan, I think. And Eric, I believe you despise it.
I do. I despise it. I've been here for so many decades and I have yet to learn it, properly. I just find it doesn't make sense to my brain. Looking at a character and remembering it for some reason due to a unique combination of, radicals or just the way it's composed, I can get on board with that. But this bow, ow, bow doesn't work for me.
Yeah, likewise. I won't say I despise it. It's been very helpful to a whole lot of Taiwanese school children, and I guess a few Westerners trying to learn the language. But yeah, you're not the only person I've heard who hates the bopomofo. And just a second ago, you mentioned radicals. I think that should be explained. Chinese characters look ridiculously complicated, and they are.
Yes. But okay, so this is again controversial. I'm not a linguist. You're not a linguist. And we're two white guys who don't really read and write Chinese talking about this subject. So we're not experts in this in any way. A disclaimer. Yeah.
We don't have licenses to practice Chinese.
Exactly. But as I understand it, at least as I understood it, technically, Chinese characters boil down to 214 pieces of a puzzle. Each one of these pieces is called a radical. So, for example, Taiwan's most common surname is Chen, and, it's a surname of former President Chen Shui-bian. On one side, you have the radical for ear, and then on the right side, you have the radical for east. Although you can break east down further, you've got a square and a field, and then you could into more radicals.
Oh, this is all very visual, Eric. It's not podcast friendly. Listeners can look up radicals if they're confused or interested.
Yeah, I will post something as well. I'm actually getting a lot of this from a book that I bought at Cave's bookstore way back in September of 1992.
Oh,
William McNaughton's Reading and Writing Chinese. And in there, he has the radicals broken down. So when I was first trying to learn Chinese, I thought, hey, shortcut. Just memorize the 214 radicals and shuffle them around like a game of mahjong. However, like mahjong, it ain't that simple.
No, it's not. And if you read my book, You Don't Know China, you will hear some of my feelings on the Chinese language and learning Chinese.
Yes, not exactly positive. I've read that book, and your argument basically boils down to too much effort for what you get.
Yeah, but that book has aged very well. I called Chinese out as being the hottest new thing. It was going to take over the world. Everyone's learning Chinese. Not for the reasons I state. Your characterization of my book was an oversimplification.
Okay, fair enough. But speaking of oversimplifications, or just simplifications, let's today try to settle once and for all, which is better, simplified or traditional Chinese. And I think the best way to begin this is by telling the story of where simplified Chinese came from.
It came from the communists, the godless Reds. What more do you need to say?
Hang on. I know you're an imperialist reactionary, but it's not quite that simple.
Yeah, I know. Just joking. It's fun. But some of it did come from the communists.
Yes. We need, however, to give credit to those who have been simplifying characters for perhaps 2,500 years. One example would be the way people in Japan and China write the character for 10,000, one, yuan, yuan, which is a number concept that we don't have in English, and very confusing to poor foreigners who come here and try to figure out how to count. But anyway, the simpler version was used first, reports say, some 2,500 years ago.
Right. So the simpler characters are coming out of cursive writing. Cursive, that's when you keep your pen or your brush on the paper and you just keep moving. Popular during the Han Dynasty. And this cursive was called, from memory, I think is it Chaoshu? Grass words, grass script. Sort of like Chinese minimalism. So you got the movement of the brush, keep it as simple as possible, resulting in some of the versions of characters being simplified. Just some parts of those characters missed out. And over time, some of these cursive forms became simplified Chinese.
I'll post some pictures online as soon as I can that show examples of the calligraphy you're talking about from the Han Dynasty, especially from one guy called Mi Fu, mi as in rice, yeah?
Rice wine.
This guy, he lived from 1051 to 1107. So if you look at his version, many of the characters remarkably look like current simplified Chinese characters. His calligraphy kind of looks a bit like Manchurian or some sort of Sanskrit or something. It doesn't resemble traditional Chinese really at all, at least to my eyes. So what we're saying is some characters had already begun to be simplified well before Lenin's birth or the communists took over China.
Absolutely, yes. Well, here's a very good example that some people might not think about that much. The first character in the name of our island, Tai. The original version has 14 strokes. You can still see it on official documents or sometimes on signs or whatever, but most of the time people use the one we're more familiar with, which only has 5 strokes. And the communists didn't come up with this. I'm not sure how old it is, though.
Some people might be surprised to learn that after the overthrow of the Qing dynasty and the establishment of the Republic of China, there were Republicans, not the American kind, but Republicans of the Republic of China, who understood that a huge percentage of their citizens were mostly illiterate. They also understood that probably the biggest reason for this was because too many characters, too many variants of the same character. And there were some guys, some people who said, hey, this is a form of elitism, and that's not cool.
Right. So starting from the last years of the Qing dynasty, a number of writers and scholars had been advocating the simplification of writing, or even the abolition of the Chinese script in favor of a phonetic script. But nothing happened until 1935. And this was under the KMT, the nationalists. They actually published an official simplification scheme, 324 new forms published as the first batch of simplified characters. They thought it would increase literacy and open up reading and writing to everyone. But conservatives resisted it, and after only 6 months, the characters were withdrawn.
So it would take a government that really didn't care much what people thought to actually implement a radical change in Chinese characters.
Radical change. Was that an attempt at a pun?
You decide.
Oh.
The communists come in, they're preaching the gospel of equality and unity, we are the world, all that. Part of it was that people should be able to read and write.
The communists in the 1950s began an extensive reform of Chinese characters that resulted in what today is called simplified Chinese. There were several waves of simplified characters being introduced. Lastly, in the 80s, I think. And of course, Taiwan never adopted the modified writing from across the strait.
No. For anyone who's interested, Taiwan, as I understand it, we don't ban the importation of writing or printing, the simplified characters. They may have done so at some point, but Currently, you can, have a book in jiǎntǐzì, but government documents are not allowed to use them. And every now and then, when they crop up in a road sign, it causes outrage. There was a university not long ago that had to apologize for putting out half their test, and doesn't go over well when they are seen in public here.
In China, likewise, no direct ban on traditional characters, and you will see them used in the names of fancy hotels or restaurants, or anyone that wants to look classy or old school.
So back to the people who gave us simplified characters used in China, there were a couple of men who were part of the May 4th movement. These people were instrumental. The May 4th movement was a cultural, anti-imperialist student protest, quite a huge thing, that came about as a result of what China got out of the Treaty of Versailles.
Right, so that treaty was just after World War I and allowed Japan to take over a few parts of China that used to belong to Germany, including Qingdao, Qingdao bear.
That's right.
And the Chinese government was so weak it really couldn't do anything about it.
Even though technically it had been on the side of the Allies in World War I and had even sent Chinese people to Europe to work for the Allies, laborers. But they still got a raw deal. And this really angered a lot of people. Many of these super angry protesters would go on to become leaders in the Chinese Communist Party.
We don't want to give you a whole bunch of different names, as that can be confusing.
I'll put names of as many people as I can on the website.
Good. But let's just say that there were roughly 5 people or so who were really key in helping to find vernacular characters used all the way back from the Yuan dynasty and then published lists of characters that could be simplified. One important person was Chen Xuantong. He was born in 1887, same year as Chiang Kai-shek. Died a lot earlier though, 1939. He, like many of those who wanted to modernize China, went to university in Japan and then came back and tried to change things to modernize. He was quite extreme and supported the abolition of classical Chinese.
Something I think many junior high school students in Taiwan today would definitely vote yes on. When they show you these characters that are so specific, like this one means a boat rowing down a lake on the left side with grass near and a cow watching from the... It's like, man.
Most Taiwanese kids hate their Chinese class, and a lot of that is having to deal with these antiquated, classical Chinese characters from...
Can't you just take the Confucian thing and turn it into modern Chinese and learn that? Do you really need to learn the old stuff?
No.
Well, I guess it's asking if you need to learn Shakespeare.
Trying to find a comparison for classical Chinese and modern Chinese, it's much worse than Shakespearean English and modern English. Think Latin and modern Italian.
Whoa. Yeah, no thank you.
No. But going back to this Chen chap, he and many of his contemporaries were looking at the, Confucian system still operating in China and thinking how much they held the country back. Confucianism, or the way it was practiced, was extremely conservative. And it might have worked a long, long time ago, but not in the 20th century.
I could argue, and will argue, it's a big reason. Confucianism is a big reason for why China didn't become what Japan became.
Well, I've increasingly come to believe that it was more the case that Japan was exceptional rather than China being so slow to modernize.
So you're pro-Japanese.
I didn't say that. They modernized too fast, and it had bad consequences for the area.
Good point. Well, I do remember an essay where Chen wrote, if you want to abolish Confucianism, you got to abolish the Chinese written language. If you want to get rid of the average person's childish, uncivilized, obstinate way of thinking, then it is all the more essential that you abolish the written Chinese language in which Confucian thoughts and fallacious Taoist sayings are recorded. So the dude is pretty hardcore. Just abolish traditional Chinese or Chinese characters.
He and a lot of scholars in his circle were very interested in replacing Chinese characters with a Roman-based alphabet. In other words, basically something like the Hanyu Pinyin system that is used today in China and is pretty good. I love the tone marks over it, over the words.
Yeah, but I don't know how well it would have worked because if you think about like shun, even if you have a tonal mark, there's still like 6 or 10 or 12 of these, and each one is different. Same pronunciation, same tone.
You're being homophonic.
How would you differentiate between the shuns?
That's
Very
right. So
hard,
when you talk into your phone, right, and you're speaking Chinese into the phone, and they give you a whole lot of choices, you need to choose which one because there are so many words with the same characters.
That's
with the
what
same...
the intelligence of the phone, it picks up on context. So you say,
yeah.
不好意思,我今天没有办法来. It picks up, and the lie is not going to be 来清的, or, it's going to be the right one.
Wow, those phones are mighty smart. I'm thinking they might want to call them smartphones.
Yes. But in general, I'm with them on the idea of using an alphabet because it certainly would have made learning Chinese easier for like me.
Yeah, but it would have really destroyed a core element of a civilization. And I don't know if that's so good. But yeah, Vietnam, they did it. They went with Romanized script. So yeah, I don't know. Hard to know. On a completely unrelated side note, this person, Chen, had a son who became a nuclear physicist and is sometimes called the father of the Chinese atomic bomb. So it seems the Chen family were pretty much into destruction.
The son, China's Oppenheimer, he's sometimes called, was a major leader in the so-called 2 bombs, 1 satellite program.
Never heard of it. 2 bombs, 1 satellite. Oh, the Chinese. Well, both sides of the strait. They love their numbers.
Yes. The 5 no's, the 6 yeses.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
It was a race for the PRC to develop an atomic bomb, a hydrogen bomb, and put up a satellite. The PRC conducted its first atomic bomb test on Chen's 51st birthday. But this guy, he actually has more in common with Oppenheimer than just both being bomb fathers. Yeah?
Bomb fathers. I'm looking at the wiki link you sent me. Yeah. Joined the CCP in 1954. And you'd think he would have earned a secure place as a stalwart communist, but no. During the very uncultured Cultural Revolution, he gets sent off to the countryside for re-education by the peasants. And he's suspect because he's been overseas. He's been to a UN conference in 1946. That's before the PRC was founded, with a delegation of nationalist Chinese scientists.
Okay, so building your country's atomic bomb is not enough to keep you from being re-educated by peasants.
Nope. Even current CCP dictator Xi Jinping got sent into the wilderness to learn from the peasants.
John, I'm starting to think he did not actually learn anything from the peasants.
Good point. But back on to the subject. One person whose story we probably should tell is Lu Xun. If some of you recognize the name Lu Xun, it's because he's one of the best-known modern Chinese authors and was part of the new culture movement that challenged traditional Chinese culture and values. He wrote a really famous short story called A Madman's Diary. And if you want to sum up Lu Xun, you might say he was one of the people who looked at Europe and America and criticized their imperialism, but also looked at Japan and saw how they had modernized. He was brave enough to then look back at his own country and say, we need to make changes.
There's this famous story that Lu wrote involving a Chinese man being beheaded by Japanese soldiers for allegedly spying for Russians.
Yeah, that's the story of RQ. A picture on Wikipedia apparently is the inspiration. So in this story, Lu writes about a beheading and how Chinese people were watching it take place and just had no reaction to it. They weren't angry, sad, just apathetic. But yeah, Eryk, Lu Xun, I mean, he had the good sense to die before the communist revolution, so he's sort of not blamed. But he was a commie, well, at least left wing.
Okay. But he never joined the Communist Party.
Yeah, he was pretty careful, I think. I recall that Mao asked him to write a novel about the communist revolution set in rural China, but Lu Xun had the good sense to say, I don't know enough. I wouldn't be able to do it.
I haven't learned enough from the peasants. Also, Mao is supposed to have said that had this famous writer survived into the 1950s, he would have either needed to go silent or go to prison. So, an interesting character. Someone who reportedly thought that the Republic of China Revolution of 1911 was a failure. In 1925, which is the year Dr. Sun Yat-sen died, Lu Xun said, quote, "I feel the so-called Republic of China has ceased to exist. I feel that before the revolution, I was a slave. But shortly after the revolution, I have been cheated by slaves and have become their slave."
That's a lot of slavery, yeah.
Yeah.
Lu's writings and philosophy were an influence on those who would end up creating simplified Chinese characters. But it's hard to know what the man himself would have thought of the ones that eventually became standard. There's a quote from him that makes you wonder. He says something along the lines of, "If Chinese characters are not destroyed, then China will die."
Okay, that's hardcore.
Yeah, anyway, Eryk, we've not really argued over traditional versus simplified characters.
No. Okay. But to review, the communists introduced simplified characters, especially in the Mao years, but many of the simplifications were not new inventions, but rather continuations of older variant forms. So, John, simplified characters have a long tradition. So what's your problem, man? What are your objections?
A question of aesthetics, my dear fellow. Aesthetics, beauty. The traditional characters which Taiwan uses are more pleasing to the eye.
Okay, well, in my heart, I'm with you on this, but I'm taking the other side.
Yeah.
It might just be that we're used to what we've been used to, you and I coming on 30 years here. However, this is true. The traditional characters, I feel, are sometimes so crowded with strokes, it looks like a solid little block of ink. You can't even make it out. When these kids, you see them writing this tiny little thing with an ink pen, it's an ink blot. It's too much.
Yeah, occasionally, but overall, I'd say traditional characters, beautiful, elegant, artistic, more poetically expressive.
Okay, I know what's coming next. You're going to bring up the character for love. Are you not?
Yes, I am actually, yes. The character for love. The simplified character has the heart radical, the symbol of the heart, removed.
This is such a trope. Yeah, love without a heart.
Yeah, would be nice to blame the heartless communist, but that character was a variant dating back centuries.
Many centuries, like over 1,000 years. I've read that the mainline form of I, or the simplified one, is one of various variants found in medieval Buddhist manuscripts.
Oh, those heartless proto-communist Buddhists.
Yes.
But another point, the traditional characters sometimes have a deeper connection to the culture and history of China.
Okay,
Can't think of a good example off the top of my head, so I'm just going to say as a general point, it's harder for readers of simplified characters to, access to read a lot of China's ancient texts, old texts.
Yeah, it's difficult for everyone.
True, yes.
You mentioned beauty. There are some that I just scratch my head. Why did you have to simplify East?
Yeah.
Dong.
Yeah.
It's already simple enough, and then you did this, which is just so ugly. However, Guangzhou, the Guang, with that little dong, dong, that is just so easy. Practically speaking, language is for communication in the here and now. Simplified characters, are they not, easier to learn, easier to read, and easier to write?
Yes.
And then there's the question of global use. The great majority of Chinese use simplified Chinese. It is the official Chinese at the United Nations.
That's true, yes.
Okay, so, like I said, actually my heart's closer to you. Well, I want the I, or the heart in the I. But my wife's surname is Liu, and it's like 4,000. But the simplified version, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And every time I write her name, I use that one. When I'm writing my address, the character for district, Chu, and then the X in the middle. So I want a hybrid system where the simplified characters that I choose to use are the ones that we use. So basically, I want to decide for everyone what should be right.
Yeah, I'm with you. I prefer traditional characters, but it's not something I would die for. And, it's an example of we don't need to hate everything about China.
No,
Europe.
all this is becoming moot, though, with technology.
True.
All right, folks, we've kept you long enough as we've babbled on and on about this. How about if you send us some comments, what you think? Get the debate going on social media.
Yes. So just to end on a happy note, don't hate China for its simplified characters. Hate them for their persecution of people, their
And specifically
enslavement of
the
millions.
Chinese Communist Party, not just China. We need to make that clear. China's not our enemy.
Yes, you've just gone on a list.
I was there a long time ago. All right. Thank you for listening to Formosa Files. I'm Eric Michael Smith. Bye.
I'm John Ross. Bye.